So the new Call of Duty game has been out for quite a bit, and I've actually made videos on the past about the series just generally being like US propaganda, which has been far more truer the further you go back. Now, I made a whole video essay about the Black Ops games, Modern Warfare, just being like generally like pretty racist and like very, I guess, propagandized depictions of history. And that includes, of course, the role of the CIA in things like Vietnam. I think the Black Ops storylines around the Vietnam War have to be some of the grossest stuff the series has done. But yeah, just generally, it preys on American ignorance and tells them a story which kind of fits in with American sensibility. Now, I actually made a video nearly 4 years ago, I think, is it 3 or 4 years ago? 4 years ago nearly, about Black Ops Cold War, which was basically the series' re-entry into the Black Ops games. And it was a sequel to Black Ops 1 and a prequel to Black Ops 2. And this new game is kind of following that. And what was interesting about that game, obviously it fell into the similar tropes of like Vietnamese, Russians all being the bad guys and stuff. But what was interesting about that game is the CIA had come across probably the worst it's ever done in Call of Duty, in that this character called Russell Adler was actually the bad guy. And he brainwashed your character with MK Ultra, and at the end you can actually choose, if you want, to betray Russell Adler and basically kill all the main characters from the old games, like Woods and Mason, for example. Now, I've completed the campaign, and I've actually put a lot of time into this Call of Duty, and all the gameplay you're going to be seeing is my gameplay, which I've been recording this week for this video. Just going to have that on the background. I'll show you some campaign footage as well. And just generally, I think this is the best Call of Duty in a long time. The thing is, someone asked me on Blue Sky, is it okay to like Call of Duty? And I'm just going to say yeah, because I've been a fan of Call of Duty for a long, long time. Way before I was political, I loved Call of Duty 2, 3, Modern Warfare, World at War. Absolutely obsessed with like World at War, Black Ops, and Black Ops 2 back in the day. So yeah, I'm a big fan. And in terms of first person shooters, there's not loads of high quality ones with good campaigns these days. Yeah, I like it. And what I haven't liked so much recently, and I'll just start with this because it's the good parts, I haven't really liked the zombies or the multiplayer in a while, but I'm really liking the multiplayer this year. Like, I played a fair bit of Cold War during COVID, I played some Vanguard before I went travelling, and I didn't mind them, but they're just a bit too chaotic, and I think this has a really nice balance where if you play on the larger maps at least, I really started to enjoy my time with this, and I guess it's just like what COD's become now, a bit more customizable, bit more like varied play styles, customize the guns a lot more than you used to. And I didn't love the Cold War setting, the 1980s one, but I think they've done a good job with the 1990s setting, early 90s. I think it just fits COD very nicely, where when I'm playing like early 80s, it feels a bit too modern. Like a lot of the stuff you're doing feels a bit too modern for 1981, but 1991, like, it just fits well. And I just enjoy the maps, I enjoy the aesthetic, and it reminds me a lot of, all the good movies that came out in the 90s. A lot better than the 1980s movies. When I'm playing the campaign, I'm thinking about Point Break, I'm thinking about The Matrix, I'm thinking about like all these great action movies and kind of the aesthetic of these movies. So overall, I really like this. And I've also been playing the zombies, and I put some zombie gameplay on screen for you. No Dead Ops Arcade returning, sadly. I do really enjoy that. But what is nice is you get two different zombie maps, and the one I'm showing you on screen, Liberty Falls, it's a bit more of a classic zombie map in a way we haven't seen in a long time. Like, very standard, just like a little town, and I've been enjoying it like a lot. And what is really cool is this third person mode, which I know COD has had a few third person modes in the past, but I think it's just a great way to play it. And I've actually been playing Halo Infinite in third person as well. I'm a big first person shooter guy, but I'm just enjoying this at the moment. And yeah, I put a lot of hours into this COD. I'm really surprised about how much I like it, and I think I'm going to play it for a long, long time. I was even talking to my brother, who I've been playing online with recently, and just saying, I'm surprised at how good this is. And what you can always tell with COD is when they've had time to put effort in. Last year was basically a DLC turned into a full game. And I didn't play Modern Warfare 3 or 2 or 1 actually, the remakes. But the vibe I got with 3 is they weren't putting in effort. And even with Vanguard, you could feel a little bit of effort lacking. And even with Cold War, it felt like that. And that's because of things like COVID and stuff. But at the same time, when COD has effort put into it. I'm thinking of like Black Ops 3, I'm thinking of Black Ops 2, when it gives you this full package of co-op, a good single player campaign, and a good multiplayer. It's just great value, and it just feels good to spend money on this sort of product when you get so much enjoyment out of it in many different ways. So yeah, I think this is one of the best CODs in a long time. And in terms of the story, I'd say it's one of the better COD campaigns. Infinite Warfare is probably my favourite story. I'd say Black Ops and World at War are probably my favourite campaigns. Now let's talk about like the campaign. Let's talk about the subject of the video. Let's talk about US propaganda. So the campaign is basically set in 1991, directly following the events of Black Ops 2, or the Black Ops 2 prequel kind of stuff. So all that stuff with Raul Menendez, Jason Hudson, Woods and Mason, that all happened. Woods is in a wheelchair. He is in the game. He's just helping you out. But it's also a direct sequel to Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. So in this mission you're seeing right here, I'm going around with Adler. I'm going around with Park, who was the British MI6 agent. And let's talk about the bad parts of this game first. So what you're seeing on screen right now is a mission in the middle of the game, which is a really good mission. It's like an open world mission. It gave me kind of like Metal Gear vibes in some ways, where you go around attacking the Iraqi army during the first Gulf War. And the thing is, this is my main criticism of the game. I don't think this game is like straight up Western propaganda like a lot of CODs, but I do think sometimes dropping you into a conflict without context just kind of plays into general kind of like, let's say, racism and how we view like Arabs in video games and people like Iraqi, because I just don't think there's much context given to this. Now, I'm not here to say, you know, I want necessarily like loads of humanization of Saddam Hussein's army and stuff, because the Gulf War is one of the few wars in recent history, although there are like, you know, terrible war crimes going on from the Western side as well as Saddam Hussein's forces in places like Kuwait. At the same time, it's one of those conflicts where most of the world kind of agreed because Saddam threatened the world oil supply. So, and also you're fighting a bad guy like Saddam Hussein. I don't really care as much in that context, but I also think when I think about who's playing these games now, how many people realize it's the first Gulf War? What is one thing I want to know? Because when someone who's like 15, like when I was playing old CODs, I loved history, right? So I kind of understood it. If you're 15 years old and you're playing this and you hear Saddam Hussein, you're just going to make that connection that it's the first Iraq. I think you're going to think it's the 2003 Iraq War. Like, I know it says 1991, but I think because it does such a poor job at contextualizing the first Gulf War as anything more than just a backdrop to violence, I don't think it does a good job in painting a picture of the world after the Cold War, or what this conflict is even about, and also the consequences of this conflict. Because in one hand, you can say, yeah, the world came together, the UN agreed on something for once, even kind of the USSR, and they destroyed a bad man who was threatening the innocent Kuwaitis. But also, what happened in this war as well, US troops got stationed in Saudi Arabia in a massive way for the first time, which was also a big triggering point for things like, you know, as we spoke about in other videos recently, like Bin Laden, right? So I think that context of growing US presence in the Middle East is important. But what it serves for in this game is just like a fun, like, conflict to run around in. And it is fun. Like, I thought this mission was absolutely great. Here I am stealthing around a base. There's like an enemy tank patrolling and I'm taking them out all sneakily. But again, it just kind of feeds into this whole narrative about all our enemies being and looking the same. They're either Russian, they're either Middle Eastern people, or they are East Asian people. And I just think if you're going to do something like the first Gulf War, which I actually wrote my master's thesis on, I think a lot of context would go a long way, especially if we're going to be like these special forces soldiers. I'm not asking for, like I said, something to add to my master's thesis, but I think the lack of historical context in Call of Duty games generally doesn't help paint a certain picture of certain parts of the world. And generally, this isn't just for Call of Duty, plays into a lot of tropes about the Middle East where people just see it as a perpetual conflict zone. Like, for example, the way people view Gaza, they don't really care because they think, oh, Muslims in the Middle East, they've always been like bad, right? And because you're having this narrative about this, I feel like it plays into that similar sentiment. And I always said, if you're going to do the Gulf War, why don't we include like the Kuwaiti resistance to Saddam's occupation? Like, humanize people who are from the region a bit more, rather than just have Western soldiers going into like an outpost like this and just killing Iraqi soldiers, as if that hasn't been done a million times in video games with various different like Arab militaries and stuff. But yeah, like I said, I don't care so much that I'm fighting the Iraqi military. It's not like they're a bunch of nice guys, but just generally in terms of the culture, I wish games that would actually include stuff like that would contextualize things. But other than that, what is interesting about this game, and I'll tell you where it fumbles for me, is actually most of the enemies in the game are not Russian. They're not Iraqi. Iraqis do reoccur in this game as the enemies. They're actually American, which I thought was a nice twist, and I feel a bit let down by the game. So basically, the story of the game is there is a mercenary group that is kind of like come out of nowhere, and it's mainly filled with Americans and Westerners. And it turns out later that this is a group called Pantheon, which have emerged inside the CIA itself. So what this game kind of is like a CIA civil war, and you're trying to stop like these rogue. Well, you're technically the rogue CIA group, but you're trying to stop this kind of like offshoot of the CIA from getting a chemical weapon and using it to basically frame the current director of the CIA and take over the CIA from within. And you're kind of tasked to stop that, and the bad group of people. And yeah, the whole game is basically you fighting other Americans who want to do bad. So I thought the game was kind of interesting because for most of the game, you're on the run from the CIA who are hunting you down. So I'm thinking, oh, this is really, really cool. The CIA were bad in Cold War, but ultimately it seemed like their actions were kind of justified by the game, right? But here I am, I'm running from the CIA and I'm fighting Americans. Maybe it's saying something interesting about American imperialism. And that's why it fumbles the ending so bad is, no, it's not a comment on the CIA. You saved the CIA from Pantheon so the CIA can continue doing what it's always done, right? So essentially you have saved the CIA from being overthrown by another group within the CIA. And there's no real commentary about the CIA being bad after that. It's just simply this group called Pantheon that are bad. The offshoot, the rogue CIA, that's bad. But the standard CIA guys, nah, they're actually pretty cool. They're pretty cool. Don't worry about it. Now, we do kind of have to talk about the makeup of your team. Like, there's a guy in your team, your main tech guy. He is ex-Stasi. And it could use it as an opportunity to make him seem like an animal, but he's actually one of the more humanized characters. Like, he doesn't really want to use violence, and he hates the CIA as much as he hates the Stasi. So I don't mind that too much, and I thought it was interesting. There's like criminals you work with as well. One called Sev, who literally just works for criminal families, and a lot of the villains as well that you fight are also just like organized crime families in like Mediterranean Europe. So it becomes more like a James Bondy thing, this game specifically, and it did give me the vibes of James Bond a lot. So I appreciated that kind of diversity as well. It wasn't all just like American soldiers in Vietnam, like the first Black Ops game, or like in fighting Russians. It's mainly fighting Americans, gangsters, and some Iraqi soldiers. So I would say for this game, being like blatant US propaganda, yeah, it is in some ways. It like by the end, the CIA are seen as the good guys when you kind of thought they're being seen as the bad guys, especially when Russell Adler cracks out MK Ultra again to use on someone else. But also another thing he does as well, it's pretty clear Russell Adler killed the main villain's parents in front of him when she was a child. So this guy, I like him as a character because he's a straight up fucking psycho. But at the same time, what I don't like about him as a character is it seems to eventually justify his actions. Not in that context. They say maybe her parents were defectors or something to the Soviet Union. But at the same time, he does unhinged shit, which seems to eventually have good outcomes. So I don't like that. But I do like him as a character because morally, he's a terrible fucking person. But he looks like Robert Redford from like Spy Game or like 3 Days of the Condor. So yeah, I enjoyed his character. I enjoyed the story revelation about him being even worse than I thought he was. But again, it all comes back to normalizing the CIA, normalizing like the British military, the US military, normalizing like wars in the Middle East. I don't think it's the worst example of this stuff, but I've wrote articles in the past about how all of these games and films being set in the same locations, the same conflicts, or what people might view as the same conflicts. Like, the Middle East in perpetual conflict is the setting for so much of this stuff. And it just really helps to dehumanize that part of the world and make everyone see it as a place that will never actually know any peace. And that there's nothing you can do about it. And that's just the way they are. They love fighting. They love insurgent groups. They love fighting each other. They love fighting Israel. And even in Cold War, one of your allies was a Mossad agent. Like, thankfully, he's gone from this game. He can actually die in Cold War, but he can also survive. So, yeah, it is an interesting... I wouldn't call it subversion. I thought it was going to be a subversion when I was playing the campaign. But it is just an interesting time. And also, I think it's a great game. And I know that sounds funny because it's a Call of Duty game. There's also, like, a very trippy zombie level, which I won't spoil, but there was a throwback to some of the zombie songs from the original Black Ops games, which I, like, fanboyed about because I love those songs. So, yeah, overall, like I said, you can play this game, make up your own mind. I would say, yeah, US propaganda, definitely. CIA propaganda, yeah, for sure. Could have done something interesting if it wanted to about the CIA, and ended up kind of, you know, going back to normal, sadly. But it is nice to see COD shifting away a bit from the blatant, in my opinion, very racist propaganda it used to push in games like Black Ops or Black Ops 2. At the same time, when you're covering a group like the CIA, there's so much opportunity to show them being some of the worst people in the modern history of humankind, which they were. And while Russell Adler is a good indicator of that, at the same time, I don't like how much what he does is eventually justified by the goodies eventually winning, which he is a part of. And in one of the optional endings for the Cold War, you can actually kill Adler and the rest of them, but the canon ending is he survives and he actually shoots the protagonist. So, and then he saves the day. So that is the annoying part of, like, Call of Duty. But at the same time, I'm not offended by this game. If people just say it's like, you know, another US imperialism simulator, I can understand that to a certain extent, but I think the history is so poor. It's not like it's trying to justify much that the US do, but I think it's just in the overall picture of the game, it does help that with a lot of other things. A lot of other games and movies do. So yeah, that is my review of the new Call of Duty. And yeah, if you're looking for a good first-person shooter that has a good campaign, a good co-op mode, and a good multiplayer, I'd recommend. And I'd say it's the most varied one, and the stealth is very good, and there's lots of nice puzzles and unlockables. So I'd say if you're looking for a game set in a historical period like 1991, 4 years before I was born, then check out Call of Duty.